Good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 349 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where the Wayne writers really messed things up for Gondor.
Pelennor didn't really help matters, though. Folks, pull up a bench in the common room and join us. I am Don Marshall, the obscure Lord of the Rings facts guy, and I am here with the man of the West, whose claim upon the throne of Gondor has been rejected. Alan Sisto.
Well, I guess for good reason, to be honest. I mean, yeah, who can blame him? I'm a little short to be the king of Gondor. Folks, join us as our Vedwi argues and the Dunedain dismiss as we work our way through Appendix A14, covering the end of the kings in Gondor.
Folks, no matter how you arrived, you are all welcome here in the common room at the Prancing Pony Podcast, where we are reading and talking our way through Middle-earth with plenty of speculation and bad jokes along the way.
And we love our deep dives into the lore, discussing our favorite themes, and a whole lot more.
But we do try to keep it light and fun. Think of this like a couple of friends chatting at a pub, and we're very glad you've joined us.
Are you saying you're old enough to go to a pub now, Don?
You know,
I got you speechless, didn't I?
You did.
Happy birthday to you, by the way.
Thank you very much.
As we're recording this, his birthday was very recent, so I do have to wish him that. Now, folks, I am sure that you'll be glad you joined as well once we get past the bad jokes. But before we get to tonight's chapter discussion, it's time for fan favorite Philology Fair. Now, we'll start with an easy one, and it's the name of Arvedwi, the last king of Arthedain, which, spoilers, we know because it says that his name means last king. The first element is something you should certainly recognize by now, Ar or Ara, meaning noble or royal. We see that everywhere, like in Aragorn, Arwen, Argonath, and so on. So the second element is the lenited form Vedwi with a V of the element Medwi with an M, meaning last. And we see this exact form of Vedwi in one other spot in The Lord of the Rings. It's back when Glorfindel encounters Strider and the Hobbits. Then he cries out, Aina Vedwi Dunedain, me govanen. Well, in Parma El Delamberon 17, Tolkien translates Glorfindel's cry as, at last Dunedain, well met. So Vedwi is last. Now we see the same root of the original element Medwi. We see the same root met in the Oath of Elendil. Et erello endrenna utulian, sinume maruvan ar hildinjar ten ambar metta. And that's out of the great sea to Middle Earth I am come. In this place will I abide, and my heirs, unto the ending of the world. That ending of the world, ambar metta. Same element, just that it undergoes a soft mutation from M to V.
Love that song. Just Viggo Mortensen's interpretation of it gets me every time. It is so good.
I don't know, did you hear when we did that in Stuart and the King? I actually tried to sing it. It took like 17 takes, but yeah. Fantastic.
You got to get it just right. We also see that met root in Methedras, which means last peak, and a song about one of my favorite well-known characters, Borondir.
Well-known characters?
Yes.
You're saying too much. Nobody knows who Borondir is.
Well, he is a little-known character. He was one of only 6 Gondorian riders sent by Cirion to make it to Eorl in the north of the story of Cirion and Eorl. That song is called Rohan Methestel, Rider of the Last Hope. So even though there were 6 of them, it only is one.
Yeah, because he's the only one who made it. So he was the Rohan Methestel, the Rider of the Last Hope. Now, later in this episode, we'll talk about his claim, that is Arvedwi, not Borondir. Arvedwi's claim on the kingship of Gondor after the death of Ondaher and his sons. But first, let's take a look at the name Ondaher.
Yeah, we mentioned the meaning of Ondaher's name in passing last week near the end of that discussion, where we were looking at the names Tarandor. This is the nephew of King Telemnar, who died alongside with his children in the plague of 1636. We mentioned that Tarandor's name means King of Stones and referenced Ondaher's name, Stone Lord, to help illustrate the point.
Right.
And that is, in fact, the meaning of his Quenya name, Ondaher. The Ondo element means stone, as in the material, as opposed to like a small individual stone, which was Quenya Sar. Think of Elisar, meaning elf stone.
Mm-hmm.
Ondo is cognate with Sindarin's Gond or Gondo, which we see in a lot of words like Gondor, Gondhirim, masters of stone, Argonath, royal stones, but we also see the Quenya Ondo in the original Quenya name for Gondolin, Ondolinde, singing stone or stone of music.
That's right. Now, there was also a town or settlement in Númenor that we saw a few episodes back when we looked at the island of Númenor called Ondosto. and that means stone city or stone fortress, which Christopher Tolkien believes was named after the stone quarries in the area. But the really interesting thing about Andaher's name is that in the original drafts of the appendices, and even in the first edition of The Lord of the Rings, his name was not Andaher, but Andohir, with a H-I-R instead of H-E-R. Now that's a mixed name with the Quenya element for stone still, Ando, but the Sindarin element for lord, Hir, as in Rohirrim, horse lords, or Gwaihir, wind lord. Now for the second edition, Tolkien changed it back to the pure Quenya version, Andoher. That final element, Her, is from the Quenya element Heru, meaning lord or master. And we see that in the names of Kiriaher, ship lord, the 15th king of Gondor, who would later take the name Hydermendakil, and Herunumen, the heretical Quenya name of the 20th ruler of Númenor, Ar-Adunakor.
Then there's the name of his daughter, Firiel, the only of his children to survive the plague, and maybe because she was married to Arvedui and living far to the north when the plague, it didn't quite hit as hard in that area. Right. She shares a name with none other than Feanor's mom, who was called Miriel during her life, but was given the name Firiel when she died.
That's right. Now that IEL suffix, that's somewhat common, and you've seen it in other women's names. It means daughter, literally, but it is often applied simply as a feminine suffix. So IEL, pretty straightforward. The FIR element is actually a verb meaning to die. And for more on that, I want to go to Morgoth's Ring, that's volume 10 of the History of Middle-earth, where Tolkien writes, "Before the passing of Miriel, the Eldar of Valinor had no word for dying in this manner, natural, peaceful, that is, though they had words for being destroyed in body or being slain. But Fire meant to expire, as of one sighing or releasing a deep breath. And at the passing of Miriel, she had sighed a great sigh and then lay still. And those who stood by said, Fire, she hath breathed forth. This word the Eldar afterwards used of the death of men."
So the name means literally, correct me if I'm wrong, Alan, she that died or she that sighed?
Correct. Both,
okay.
Really. I mean, in a literal sense, she that sighed, but it references or represents she that died.
Got it. But in this case, I think it's simply mortal woman. So
right.
Not sure you want a name that, constantly reminds you of your own mortality. So
that's a very good point.
Yeah. Thanks for that one.
Hi, mortal woman. My name, never mind. I'm not interested.
Hi, my name is, my death is imminent. But no, there is another name, though, that we need to take a look at next, and it is the name of the guy that gave Arvedui his name, and comes up a little bit more, the seer and lore master of Arthedain. This is Malbeth.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Yeah, because Arvedui wasn't named Arvedui by his parents. He was named Arvedui by Malbeth the seer. Now, there are two very simple Sindarin elements here that combine to mean golden word. That's an apt name for a seer, as good as Malbeth. The Mal element comes from malt, meaning gold as metal, as opposed to golden in color, which is laure. Now, we see this Mal or malt element in things that don't actually have any gold metal whatsoever, most notably the Malorn, gold tree, Malos, gold flower, and a couple of the names of the kings of Arthedain, including Malvagil, the sixth king, whose name means sword of gold. Now, the Beth element in Malbeth's name is the lenited form of Peth with a P, meaning word. Now, we don't see that element often, but it is there in the Athrabeth, which means interchange of words. That's why we call it a debate. And one of the spells that Gandalf tries to use to open the doors of Moria, I love this. He says, Fennas Nogothrim Lasto Bethlammen, which means doorway of the dwarf folk, listen to the word of my tongue. So, golden word is Malbeth.
Oof. Tolkien's linguistics. Again, it feels like I say this every episode of the podcast.
Because you do, but it's still true, yeah.
It's still true. We only have two more to go, though. They are the names of the new king of Gondor after Orodreth's passing, and the decision of the council to reject Arvedui's claim. This is Earnil and his son Earnor. Both have the very familiar EAR prefix that means the sea or great sea that we encounter with Earendil, Earwen, and many more, so that is a good start.
Exactly. So you know already that sea or the Great Sea is part of their name. And Earnil's name uses the shortened suffix of Endil, making his name simply a shorter form of Eärendil's name, so it means the same thing, lover of the sea. Similarly, Eärnur's name uses the shortened version of Endur, meaning a shorter version of Eärendur's name, which means servant of the sea. There you have it.
Speaking of see, I think I see the next portion is a reading. Alan, would you like to begin for us?
I think I will. All right, we're going to pick up with the third evil. The third evil was the invasion of the Wainriders, which sapped the waning strength of Gondor in wars that lasted for almost 100 years. The Wainriders were a people, or a confederacy of many peoples, that came from the east, but they were stronger and better armed than any that had appeared before. They journeyed in great wains, and their chieftains fought in chariots. Stirred up, as was afterwards seen, by the emissaries of Sauron, they made a sudden assault upon Gondor, and King Narmakil II was slain in battle with them beyond Anduin in 1856. The people of eastern and southern Rhovanion were enslaved, and the frontiers of Gondor were, for that time, withdrawn to the Anduin and the Emyn Muil. At this time, it is thought that the Ringwraiths re-entered Mordor. Kalimektar, son of Narmakil II, helped by a revolt in Rhovanion, avenged his father with a great victory over the Easterlings upon Dagorlad in 1899, and, for a while, the peril was averted. It was in the reign of Arafant in the north and of Ondaher, son of Kalimektar in the south, that the two kingdoms again took counsel together after long silence and estrangement. For at last they perceived that some single power and will was directing the assault from many quarters upon the survivors of Númenor. It was at that time that Arvedwi, heir of Arafant, wedded Firiel, daughter of Ondaher, 1940. But neither kingdom was able to send help to the other, for Angmar renewed its attack upon Arthedain at the same time as the Wainriders reappeared in great force. Many of the Wainriders now passed south of Mordor and made alliance with men of Khand and of Nir-Harad, and in this great assault from north and south, Gondor came near to destruction. In 1944, King Ondaher and both his sons, Artamir and Faramir, fell in battle north of the Morannon, and the enemy poured into Ithilien. But Eärnil, captain of the southern army, won a great victory in South Ithilien and destroyed the army of Harad that had crossed the river Poros. Hastening north, he gathered to him all that he could of the retreating northern army and came up against the main camp of the Wainriders, while they were feasting and reveling, believing that Gondor was overthrown and that nothing remained but to take the spoils. Eärnil stormed the camp and set fire to the wains and drove the enemy in a great rout out of Ithilien. A great part of those who fled before him perished in the dead marshes.
We've had one evil, yes. What about second evil? Oh, I know. I guess we've had that too.
Yes,
All right.
we
What
have.
about third evil?
Sure, fine.
Wainriders.
Fine. Let's do it.
Yeah. So this is the invasion of the Wainriders, which began, according to
Not
the
to
Tale
be
of
confused
Years,
with the invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Right. That is a completely different franchise. However, one we will, or at least I would like to cover many years from now once we finish all the Tolkien stuff.
Oh, okay.
I'm setting up Alan for like 6 different podcasts in the future. Just let me cook. So this is the invasion of the Wainriders. It began, according to the Tale of Years, this is Third Age, 1851, but it would last until the Third Age, 1944. But we don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. There's a lot there.
Don't. Now, the first thing to know about these Wainriders is that they were stirred up by the emissaries of Sauron. Now, just as he was behind the Great Plague in 1636, here he is a couple of centuries later, continuing to try to weaken Gondor. After all, he's not yet strong enough on his own to defeat Gondor.
Yeah, he needs his little buddies' help. So who are these Wainriders? Not little buddies. In fact, the text says that they are a confederacy of many peoples that came from the east, said to travel in large wagons with their leaders fighting in chariots and lots of horses.
That's right. Now, what's interesting about that, if you'll pardon a brief sidebar,
I will.
Are
maybe,
you
ish?
Which are you snorting at? The fact that it's a sidebar, or the fact that it's supposedly going to be brief?
Yes.
Okay, fair enough. So, if you'll pardon the sidebar, there are some parallels between the Wainriders and the Huns of the primary world. Now, from what we know about the Huns from the 6th century Roman writer Jordanus, the Huns came from the east, historically fought alongside allied peoples like the Ostrogoths, used horses extensively, and most interestingly, defeated and enslaved Goths. Remember last week when we pointed out how Tolkien used Gothic names for the Northmen, since they were the predecessors of the Rohirrim who used Old English names? Well, Not a surprise. Tolkien was very familiar with Gothic. Take a look at letter 272, as well as Latin, the language in which Jordanus' history of the Goths was written. For that, you can take a look at letters 163 and 294. And frankly, we might look at those in the postscript for this episode, get really deep into his understanding of Gothic and Latin, and then maybe tie this together.
Yeah, it's a lot going on. And especially, we've got letter 289 to his son, Michael, written in 1966. Tolkien says something about Mirkwood that's actually fascinating. He writes, Mirkwood is not an invention of mine, but a very ancient name weighted with legendary associations. It was probably the primitive Germanic name for the great mountainous forest regions that anciently formed a barrier of the south of the lands of Germanic expansion. In some traditions, it became used especially of the boundary between Goths and Huns.
Now that is interesting. So the name Mirkwood has a legendary connection to the boundary between Goths and Huns, and we already know that the Northmen are essentially Goths. They've been given Gothic names for a very clear reason. So if a real-world comparison is to be made between the Northmen and the Goths, then the same can certainly be said for the Wainwriters and the Huns. Now, again, this is not arguing for a one-to-one allegorical connection. We're just pointing out some possible sources of inspiration.
Yeah, but this group of Wainwriters, clearly not the first. They are better equipped than previous invasions. Their attacks are significant enough that King Narmakil II, whose name means fire sword, this is like we mentioned, we went through the line of kings and we encountered the lazy son of Alcarin.
Yes, that would have been Narmakil I. This is King Narmakil II, yes. Same name, different guy. And this guy actually is more fire swordy, yeah.
Yeah, he is. He leads his men into battle with them. However, he is killed in 1856.
That's right. Now, there's more on this from Unfinished Tales, not surprisingly. In the earlier portion of the story of Cirion and Eorl, we read first that while the Northmen were slow to recover from the plague, that would have been 1636, the peoples further east had been equally afflicted, so there weren't any attacks to fend off. But then we read this. But when the invasions of the Wainwriters began and involved Gondor in wars that lasted for almost 100 years, the Northmen bore the brunt of the first assaults. King Narmakil II took a great army north into the plains south of Mirkwood and gathered all that he could of the scattered remnants of the Northmen. But he was defeated and himself fell in battle. The remnant of his army retreated over the Dagorlad into Ithilien, and Gondor abandoned all lands east of the Anduin save Ithilien.
So he brought the Gondorian army up for this, joined what was left of the Northmen, and then promptly, got himself killed in battle. Very Feanorian of him. The defeat was actually so bad that Gondor basically gave up all of their lands east of the Anduin, aside from that small little region of Ithilien. That's a huge loss for Gondor.
It's a huge loss. I mean, remember when we talked about the realm, the size of the realm, and how it went all the way up to the Celebrant and, all the way over to the Sea of Rune. I mean, we had another king earlier who was defeating enemies on the other side of the Sea of Rune, and now they've abandoned all their lands east of the Anduin, aside from that small strip of Ithilien. Now, as for how that remnant of his army escaped and retreated, I love this. There is a really, really cool footnote here in Unfinished Tales about this. It tells us that the escape of the army of Gondor from total destruction was in part due to the courage and loyalty of the horsemen of the Northmen under Marhari, a descendant of Vidugavia, king of Rhovanion. We met him before, involved, it was his daughter that married the king of Gondor, led to the Civil War, who acted as rear guard.
Now, recall how Valakar, this is the king's heir of Gondor, he went north and he was dwelling with Vidugavia, fell in love with the North, married his daughter, uniting Gondor and the Northmen, all of that stuff. Well, Marhari was kin to Narmakil II and helped his people escape by fighting a valiant guard for basically the retreat of those people, one that, as we're going to read in a moment, did cost him his life.
I love that. I think there's something to be said about these noble sacrifices, fighting rearguard actions to protect the retreat of a historically important force.
Not to belabor the point, that's a World War I reference as well, I think.
Is it? Okay.
That's a huge thing that happened, especially when the British were retreating. The British special forces were the last line of defense for, the 14-year-olds and 18-year-olds that were lining up to defend, and they were, trying to help them escape and get on the trains.
I love
Sorry,
that.
another brief World War
that's
I
really
aside.
good stuff. I appreciate that because, I'm thinking the rearguard action that Hurin and Huor fought, to allow Turgon and the Gondolindrim to escape from the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, right? They're the ones who are there fighting to protect them and enabling them to get away, because the minute Gondolin falls, right, the rest of Elvendom in Beleriand is going to fall. I mean, that's the end of things. So they fight and they sacrifice themselves knowing they're going to die. I mean, Huor even says, from you and from me, a new star shall rise. I know I'm not going to see your white city again. I'm going to die here, but I'm going to die. And in so doing, enable you to get back to your city. And from you, these historical things are going to come. So here, Marhari, pulling a Hurin and Huor, sacrifices himself to allow the remnants of Narmakil's army to escape. But that is not all that we learn there, right? It turns out that even though Gondor was defeated and King Narmakil II was killed, they had actually managed to really hurt the Wainriders. And the text explains, the forces of Gondor had inflicted such losses on the Wainriders that they had not strength enough to press their invasion until reinforced from the east, and were content for the time to complete their conquest of Rhovanion.
It's really nice for Gondor, maybe not so nice for the Northmen that are remaining in Rhovanion, unfortunately. Yeah. A few, it is said, fled over the Kelduin, river running, and were merged with the folk of Dale under Erebor, whom they were also akin. Some took refuge in Gondor, while others were gathered by Marhwini, son of Marhari, who fell in that rearguard action after the battles of the plains. Passing north between Mirkwood and Anduin, they settled in the Vales of Anduin, where they were joined by many fugitives who came through the forest. This was the beginning of the Eotheod, though nothing was known of it in Gondor for many years. Most of the Northmen were reduced to servitude, and all their former lands were occupied by the Wainriders.
Now, we're going to spend a lot more time on this when I cover Cirion and Eorl as a very extended sidebar, think 7 episodes or so, to Appendix A2 on the House of Eorl. Now, that will be with Matt from the Nerd of the Rings, and we'll be running those starting in January.
Very apt timing, given the release of a movie that will be coming out very soon.
Might have been on purpose. Yeah.
Nicely done. We also get some more information, though, from Christopher Tolkien, because he also explains that the information in the Unfinished Tales account doesn't conflict with the Lord of the Rings account, though he does acknowledge it doesn't mention a lot. So like Romendikil II's defeat of the Easterlings in 1248, the fact that Gondor took in many of the Northmen, or the marriage of Valakar to that Northman's princess.
Right. Now, still, though, Christopher points out, it adds things that aren't in the Lord of the Rings version. That the waning of the Northmen of Rhovanion was due to the Great Plague, that the battle in which King Narmakil II was slain in the year 1856, said in Appendix A to have been beyond Anduin, was in the wide lands south of Mirkwood and was known as the Battle of the Plains, and that his great army was saved from annihilation by the Wainriders through the rearguard defense of Marhari, descendant of Vitagavia.
We got to come back to the text in the appendices, though, because we do get a brief mention of what we've seen here in the Unfinished Tales account, that the people of Rhovanion were enslaved and Gondor pulled back their borders. We also then get the foreboding mention that the Nazgul re-enter Mordor around the same time.
So what I'm hearing here is you knock Gondor down and it gets up again. You ain't ever going to keep it down, are you?
That's our podcast, folks. Thanks so much for coming. Special thanks to our editor, Jordan, PPP, community manager, Kate McKenna, Patreon.
And it gets up again. You're never going to keep it down. All right. Narmakil II's son, Kalimektar, whose name is Quenya for Bright Warrior, got vengeance for his father's death by defeating the Wainriders at Dagorlad 43 years later in Third Age 1899.
That's right. Even if the father is knocked down, the son will get back up again. And though the description here is rather brief, helped by a revolt in Rhovanion, we have a lot more for you from Unfinished Tales, starting with this. But at length, King Kalimektar, son of Narmakil II, being free from the other dangers, determined to avenge the defeat of the Battle of the Plains. Messengers came to him from Marhwini, warning him that the Wainriders were plotting to raid Kalinarthon over the Undeeps. But they said also that a revolt of the Northmen, who had been enslaved, was being prepared and would burst into flame if the Wainriders became involved in war.
So the Northmen who had been taken as slaves were getting ready to lead an uprising. And if the Easterlings were drawn into battle, right, so they wouldn't have as many numbers there perhaps, then these Northman slaves and the uprising could maybe do something about all this. So Kalimektar takes his army up through Ithilien and purposefully did not hide his approach or his numbers. The idea, his objective really, was to draw the Wayne riders into battle, and for a very good reason, as we read. At length, battle was joined upon the Daggerlad, and the result was long in doubt. But at its height, horsemen that Calimectar had sent over the Undeeps, left unguarded by the enemy, joined with a great Eored, led by Marhuini, assailed the Wayne riders in flank and rear. And this proved to be a crushing defeat for the Wayne riders, who turned tail and ran back north.
Love to see it. So while King Calimectar didn't pursue them, we read that the horsemen of Marhuini harried the fugitives and inflicted great loss upon them in their long route over the plains until they were within far sight of Mirkwood. There they left them, taunting them, "Fly east, not north, folk of Sauron. See, the homes you stole are in flames, for there was a great smoke going up."
I love that. That would, of course, be the slave revolt. Now, unfortunately, as is probably the case more often than not when it comes to slave revolts, most of them died in the attempt. The Wayne riders, of course, left behind their youths and old men, aided by the younger women, who in that people were also trained in arms and fought fiercely.
Marhuini pulled his people out, and the Northmen never returned to their former homes, while Calimectar went back to Gondor, which enjoyed a brief break from war for about 45 years. 37 years later, this is in Third Age 1936, Calimectar died and his son Andaher became king of Gondor. And then sometime between then and the Third Age 1940, Andaher and the then king of Arthedain, Arafant, got together to talk about these attacks.
That's right. Now, they both believed, correctly of course, that there was a unified attempt to attack the people who had escaped the downfall of Númenor. Of course, Sauron is the one behind all of this. Now, in Third Age 1940, Arafant's son Arvedwi, and yes, we're talking about the same Arvedwi that we talked about 2 episodes ago, married Andaher's daughter, Firio.
But even with this allegiance strengthened in marriage, neither of those kings was able to help the other because in the north, Angmar is attacking Arthedain, and in the south, the Wayne riders have decided to appear just again.
Again, one more time. Why not? Third time's a charm. Now, the text tells us that the Wayne riders allied themselves with Haradrim and the men of Khand. Now, just a very quick thing on Khand. We don't know anything about it. All right. We know nothing about Khand or its people, who are called the Variogs in The Return of the King, when we read about the Variogs of Khand that were kept in reserve. Now, we speculated last season that since the word Variog is a Slavic word derived from Norse Varingar, meaning mercenary people, Tolkien may have been suggesting that the Variogs were mercenaries serving Khand, but we don't know. And that's all we have on Khand.
So now we have forces attacking Gondor from both the south, Harad and Khand, and from the north, the Wayne riders, pushing Gondor basically to the brink.
Yeah.
Then in the Third Age 1944, King Andaher and both of his sons, Artemir and Faramir, not the Faramir we knew, this is a previous Faramir, they were killed in battle near the Morannon.
And there's such a great story on that, but we'll have to cover that when we get to Cirion and Eorl later this season. Now, after the enemy came into Ithilien, they encountered Eärnil and his force. He'd already destroyed the southern half of this threat. He ended up storming their camp, burning their wains, routing the Wayne riders, with a large number of them dying in the dead marshes.
Now, there's a lot more of this in Unfinished Tales, but we're only bringing you a few bits and pieces so that we can leave something for you and Matt to cover later this season.
Absolutely. So there we learn in Unfinished Tales that after the defeat by Calimectar, the Wayne riders licked their wounds and plotted their revenge. It turns out they were eager for conquests and booty and filled with hatred of Gondor, but they waited a long time to do anything about it.
Yeah, primarily because they didn't know how weak Gondor was. They were afraid that it was bigger and stronger than it was in reality. Plus, they'd been in conflict with the people of Khand and the Haradrim. But eventually, as our primary text in the appendix tells us, a peace and alliance was agreed between these enemies of Gondor, and an attack was prepared.
Now, the appendix doesn't give us any of the in-between here. It just says that King Andaher and his sons all died in Third Age 1944. But, of course, there is more in Unfinished Tales. That information was, according to the text, deduced from the events long afterwards by historians, to whom it was also clear that the hatred of Gondor and the alliance of its enemies in concerted action, for which they themselves had neither the will nor the wisdom, was due to the machinations of Sauron.
It is always that slimy little guy, isn't it?
In other words, the Wayne riders and the East, all these people that are allying to go on Gondor, these historians are realizing that they didn't have the will or the wisdom to defeat Gondor on their own. It was all Sauron that was driving them. So that's why it hurts, because Sauron is like, using lesser.
That does kind of hurt. You're not smart enough or strong enough to come together to fight your enemy. But, Sauron can make it happen through his little manipulations. We do learn that Gondor was warned about the Wayne Riders' recovery and that they were raiding some of the lands of the Northmen. It's not like Gondor, ignored the warning. No. It's just there's not much that they could have done about it.
No, there really wasn't. They were still realistically still recovering from the plague, just like the Northmen were, and just like even the Wayne Riders were. Now, we will save the actual description of this series of battles, of the tragic deaths of Andaher and his sons, and the victory of Eärnil for the discussion of Cirion and Eorl later this season, and move on. And we will come back right after the break. Soon we're going to get back to the aftermath of King Andaher's death. But before we do, we want to remind you that there is a lot more talk going on at the Prancing Pony Podcast than just us.
The PPP has an amazing listener community, some of whom are listening to us on Discord right now, and they are constantly coming up with ways to make Alan and I laugh as we record these things, as well as great questions and discussions across all of our social media spaces. You can check out the Common Room on Facebook, our dedicated subreddit, Twitter, and much more.
Now, on Facebook, just look for the Prancing Pony Podcast. Follow the page to get the news, but you're going to want to join the group for some great discussions.
Or if you prefer Reddit, find us there at r/PrancingPonyPod on Twitter and Instagram. We are simply at Prancing Pony Pod.
Now, if you want daily Tolkien content, and again, I'm just going to say this, who doesn't? Check out Today's Tolkien Times on YouTube and all your favorite podcast apps. It's my short format daily show with everything from Middle-earth Map Mondays to Silmarillion Saturdays. Be sure to check it out at youtube.com/@TolkienTimes and follow @TolkienTimes on all your social media. Dawn, would you pick up the next reading about Malbeth?
One of my favorite parts of the entire book. Yes, absolutely. So we will skip a paragraph and head to the Council of Gondor. The Council of Gondor answered, "The crown and royalty of Gondor belongs solely to the heirs of Meneldil, son of Anarion, to whom Isildur relinquished this realm. In Gondor, this heritage is reckoned through the sons only, and we have not heard that the law is otherwise in Arnor." To this, Arvedui replied, "Elendil had 2 sons, of whom Isildur was the elder, and the heir of his father. We have heard that the name of Elendil stands to this day at the head of the line of the kings of Gondor, since he was accounted the high king of all lands of the Dunedain. While Elendil still lived, the conjoint rule of the south was committed to his sons, but when Elendil fell, Isildur departed to take up the high kingship of his father, and committed the rule in the south in like manner to the son of his brother. He did not relinquish his royalty in Gondor, nor intend that the realm of Elendil should be divided forever. Moreover, in Númenor of old, the scepter descended to the eldest child of the king, whether man or woman. It is true that the law has not been observed in the lands of exile, ever troubled by war. But such was the law of our people, to which we now refer, seeing that the sons of Andaher died childless." To this, Gondor made no answer. The crown was claimed by Eärnil, a victorious captain, and it was granted to him with the approval of all the Dunedain in Gondor, since he was of the royal house. He was son of Siriondil, son of Kalimakil, son of Arkirias, brother of Narmakil II. Arvedui did not press his claim, for he had neither the power nor the will to oppose the choice of the Dunedain of Gondor. Yet the claim was never forgotten by his descendants, even when their kingship had passed away. For the time was now drawing near when the North Kingdom would come to an end. Arvedui was indeed the last king, as his name signifies. It is said that his name was given to him at his birth by Malbeth the seer, who said to his father, "Arvedui you shall call him, for he will be the last in Arthedain, though a choice will come to the Dunedain, and if they take the one that seems less hopeful, then your son will change his name and become king of a great realm. If not, then much sorrow and many lives of men shall pass until the Dunedain arise and are united again.
All right. That whole section has got a lot of stuff to talk through. But I want to start with the paragraph that we skipped, right? There we read about the claims of Arvedwi. Now, I'm sure you remember a couple of weeks ago when we talked about Arvedwi, the last king of Arthedain, and his unfortunate death in Forachel in Third Age 1974.
But let's rewind that 30 years to Third Age 1944. This is after the death of King Andaher and his sons. At that point, Arvedwi, who is not yet king of Arnor, believes that he is qualified to take the crown of Gondor, and once he succeeds his father Arafant as king of Arthedain, to reunite the realms in exile and rule as High King. And he has basically two arguments for the claim.
That's right.
Alan, you want to take the first?
Yeah. So the first is that he is a direct descendant of Isildur, and that Isildur never relinquished his royalty in Gondor. He just handed over leadership to Meneldil, the son of his brother Anarion. If you remember, Isildur and Anarion were co-rulers of Gondor, but both subject to their father Elendil, who reigned as king of Arnor and High King of the two realms in exile.
But let's be real here, though, Alan. Every king of Arthedain could have made that sort of same claim based on this reasoning, because they're all right? They're all descended from Isildur.
Exactly. That's the whole point. I mean, the irony here is that if Arnor hadn't split into three in Third Age 861, Amleth, the eldest son of Eorendir, who would have been king of Arnor at that time, could have made a claim when Taranan Falastur died without an heir in Third Age 913. He was the very first childless king in Gondor, and it was barely 50 years after the split of Arnor. So if he had been king, he would have been able to make a very valid claim like, hey, your king died without an heir, and I'm the High King anyway because I'm the only one descended from Isildur. But here the problem was that Amleth was only 50 years removed from the split of Arnor, and he's trying to deal with the fact that there's splinter kingdoms now of Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rhudaur.
There's just so much going on, but then what makes Arvedwi's claim more persuasive than any of the other kings of the Arthedain or even Arnor? Before that, it is this second element of his claim, and that is the fact that he is married to Andaher's daughter,
Bingo.
Thiriel. You remember that name? He married her 4 years before in Third Age 1940.
Now, why is that a valid reason? Well, as we'll see in his rebuttal to Gondor's rejection of his claim, the scepter went to the oldest child of the king, not the oldest son, at least if we look at their history in Númenor. Númenor had changed from agnatic primogeniture to absolute primogeniture. That means they'd gone from eldest son to eldest child back in Second Age 892, some 4,500 years ago. So, if Gondor is following the same law of succession as Númenor did for 2,400 years before its fall, then Thiriel should be the ruling queen. Now, before we get to what the council replies with, which is where you picked up, let's talk about the validity of these claims. I mean, obviously, yes, the Isildur thing is legit.
Yeah.
Okay.
The thing for me is that I, as a person, don't hold much stock in this person has my blood and therefore they should be the ruler. Maybe that's because I was raised in a democratic society where the people elect, so I'm showing my bias.
Vote for a king?
Yeah. But nobody's handing out swords from lakes or reforging them in Elven. We don't have that here in the United States or anywhere, really. If your system of government is based on Elven magic, here in 2024, we might have a much bigger problem. But validity in terms of the ruling and all of this, it does seem as though Thiriel should be the one, the female queen of all of this.
Well, that's the thing. She should be the queen of Gondor, which would make Arvedwi, I don't know, the prince consort or something, I suppose.
I suppose so, yeah.
But then their son would be the united king of both. Yeah, it's a really interesting claim. But let's see what Gondor has to say, shall we? In what might be one of the most snarky little work email threads I've ever seen.
This is as per my last email as it gets. We pick up where we started reading. The Council of Gondor.
Yeah, pretty much is, yeah.
Led by the steward Pelendor, rejected both claims.
Yeah.
As the line of Isildur part of a claim, they argue that the line of kings of Gondor is reckoned only through Meneldil's sons because Isildur relinquished the realm. Mm-hmm. As to the sort of claim based on Thiriel's status as the only child of Andaher still living, Gondor's reply is that they have determined the heritage is only through the sun. So the goalpost just keeps moving and moving and moving, and they're just going to get what they want.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, this is the first time anybody from Arnor, or in this case, Arthedain, has tried to make a claim on the kingship of Gondor. So, in that amount of time, apparently the rules have changed. And simply put, Pelennor and the rest of the council are notifying Arvedwi, you are hereby notified that your application for kingship of Gondor is rejected. You may submit your application again in the future. I'm thinking of it not just as an email chain. This is like a job application, and they have rejected him. They're not even going to do an interview. They're like, I'm sorry, we made it clear that our qualifications are X, Y, and Z, and you're telling me something totally different.
It just doesn't make any sense. We appreciate you taking the time. We understand how much effort it takes to apply for jobs.
There's a nicely written cover letter. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not terribly hopeful, but it's Arvedwi, all of these people, they all have potential claims, but obviously Tolkien, being the author that he is, sticking with what would happen sort of in the natural occurrence of things based on the world.
Yeah, very political move. I mean, that's the thing. I think there's a reason why the text says led particularly by Pelennor, the steward, who had really, let's face it, a position of power to solidify and maintain, because now with the death of Ondahare and his sons, he's in charge until a new king is appointed. And he wants to say who that new king is. He doesn't want Arvedwi coming down, who he has no control over, no influence over. It's interesting. Yeah. So Arvedwi, of course, doesn't give up right away, right? He's like, thank you for your rejection of my application. I'm here to explain why, once again, you need to consider me, right? He sends back a rebuttal, making several good points, right? First, on the Isildur topic, he reminds him, hey, I know you keep mentioning this Meneldil dude, but Elendil is the head of the line of kings. And then you have to remember that Isildur didn't relinquish that kingship. So I don't know what you mean relinquishment. That word, you keep on using that word. I do not think that word means what do you think it means? Because I don't think Isildur would say he relinquished the royalty in Gondor. Yes, he did give over the rule of Gondor to Meneldil, to Anarian's son, but he was still going to be high king. Now, second, on the filial topic, he points back to the Númenorian law of absolute primogeniture, but he does make a very interesting observation that we may have overlooked earlier, right? He says, not been observed in the lands of exile. So I wonder if maybe we have had some eldest children that are daughters, but not been mentioned in the histories. Because, you think about it, how many generations of kings have we had?
A lot.
It seems like it's all sons. The daughters are never mentioned, whereas in Númenor they were mentioned.
Yeah, we don't even get Aragorn's daughters' names going forward in the Fourth Age. Remember, that part is still...
Well, we do at least get, in some cases, we mention that somebody had daughters. I get their names. They're not important enough for that, apparently. But it's interesting because in Númenor, we do get the names of the daughters, even the daughters who are not going to end up as ruling queens. I'm thinking of Silmarion, for instance, who ends up being the head of the matriarch of the lords of Andunier, and her son ends up being the first lord of Andunier, and then the faithful descend from there.
Yeah.
Well, and then we have the ruling queens, so they obviously get names, but we don't get that here. And you kind of think that the odds are that somewhere along the line, an eldest child would have been a daughter.
You got to figure eventually.
The odds. So. I don't know.
Something to consider.
It is interesting. But I think what this suggests, the fact that it's not always been observed in the lands of exile, suggests that maybe there have been some eldest daughters. Yeah.
Let's briefly take a look at these points. We've got the original text. First, the Isildur thing. In the disaster of the Gladden Fields, we learn about what Isildur did basically after the fall of Sauron and the death of his father. He first returned to Gondor, took on the Elendilmir as the king of Arnor and the lordship over both Gondor and Arnor.
Now, he stayed there a year, but when he left for Arnor, per footnote 10 of the Disaster of the Gladden Fields, he established Meneldil as king of Gondor. But there's nothing anywhere that suggests he was relinquishing his role as High King of both realms. In fact, he was following in his father's role as King of Arnor and High King of both realms, while Meneldil was taking over the role that he and his brother Anarion had as the co-rulers of Gondor. And I love this. It's just so detailed. Yeah.
Yeah, he put a lot of thought into this, because then there's this change in the law of succession. And for that, we go to Aldarion and Arendis. Now, in the year 892, when Ankalime was 19 years old, she was proclaimed the king's heir. And at that time, Tar Aldarian caused the law of succession in Númenor to be changed. It is said specifically that Tar Aldarian did this for reasons of private concern rather than policy, and out of his long resolve to defeat Erendis.
Yeah, well, I'm going to have so much fun going through the story of Aldarian and Erendis next season. In the meantime, let's take a look at Gondor's response to Arvedwi's detailed rebuttal. Instead, they give the crown to Eärnil with full approval of the Dunedain of Gondor. I mean, this is just... They left him on read.
They did.
They absolutely just left Arvedwi on read. Arvedwi's like, hey, wait a minute. I hear what you're saying. Let me clear this up. And they just ghost him. It is so passive aggressive.
We're not interested. Yeah, this is the pettiness of Gondorians.
Remember, this
fully
is the
there.
same group of people who just a few hundred years ago had a civil war because one of their kings dared marry a Northman. And basically, the racists in Gondor wouldn't have it. And yeah.
So coming back to Eärnil, he is basically doing the most he possibly can. He is not only a victorious military leader who defeated the Wayne Riders, and these are the same ones who killed King Andaher and his sons, but he is also of royal lineage. His great-great-grandfather was King Telumektar Umbardakil. He was descended from the younger brother of King Narmakil II, whose name we've heard a lot.
So he was of royal lineage. You just had to go back a little bit. Now, Arvedwi wisely didn't keep pushing. I mean, it's not like he's going to take Arthedain's mighty army and come force Gondor to give him the crown. He does not have the power to take the crown. He just had to make the argument, and it got rejected. So, truth is, he's barely keeping his kingdom alive as is. And not for long.
Yeah, not for long at all. We get this very foreboding line about his claim never being forgotten and the time of the North Kingdoms is coming to an end. And indeed, that is, the point of his name, as we talked about in the philology fair, Last King.
That's right. That was the name given to him at his birth, again, like we talked about in the philology fair, by Malbeth. Now, though this is a prophecy with a choice, if Gondor chooses the quote-unquote less hopeful option, then Arvedwi gets to change his name and take the high kingship. I don't know. Maybe we'll speculate about this here. Maybe a little bit. We'll speculate a little bit more on the P5, probably because we'll need to do a little more digging into some word nerdery. But what might his new name have been if Gondor had accepted his claim, right? He was going to change his name. What would that name be?
I feel like there's some sort of, youngness or newness or rebirth. So there's very much like a cycle of birth and rebirth.
Renew. Actually, Elessar takes, one of his titles is Envinyatar when he takes the throne, which means renewer. So I almost wonder whether his name might have been Envinyatar or something along those lines. That could be good. Or probably something like Vinyaran, which would be a combination of Vinya, which is young or new, and Aran meaning king. So new king or young king, maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
And Vinyatar,
no,
I like
it.
Though. Aragorn wouldn't be able to take the name Envinyatar when he became king, but I could see that fitting Arvedwi if Gondor had said, okay, let's do this. Maybe what we'll do in the P5 is speculate about what would have happened had he been king. Had Gondor said, you know what? That's a pretty valid claim. Come on down.
Like a Bob Barker on The Price is Right sort of thing.
That's right.
Yeah, no, they...
I'll take what's behind door number 3. Oh, no, let's make a deal. Wrong show. All right.
We carry on because they don't. It's just going to be a very, very long time before these kingdoms are reunited.
Yep.
And it was. The prophecy was made when Arvedwi was born. This is Third Age, 1864. It was not until Third Age, 3019, when Aragorn reunites the kingdoms as King Elessar, as we just mentioned, nearly 1,200 years, all because Pelindor and the rest of that council just couldn't allow themselves to be ruled by Arvedwi. And just, so sad.
I know. Malbeth was obviously a pretty good seer. I mean, he knew what was up with Arvedwi and the kingdom of Gondor, but do you know his other famous prophecy?
So that first one was made in the Third Age, 1864. Then, sometime during the reign of Arvedwi, from 1964 to 1974, he foretold something else. And it's in this lovely alliterative verse. Alan, would you do us a favor?
Yeah, I suppose if it's alliterative, you want me to read it. All right.
Yeah.
Over the land there lies a long shadow, westward reaching wings of darkness. The tower trembles To the tombs of kings doom approaches, the dead awaken. For the hour is come for the oath breakers. At the stone of Erech they shall stand again, and hear there a horn in the hills ringing. Whose shall the horn be? Who shall call them from the grey twilight, the forgotten people? The heir of him to whom the oath they swore. From the north shall he come, need shall drive him. He shall pass the door to the paths of the dead.
And sure enough,
that. Yep.
when Aragorn called them, they came. And this it's so good. This is why we love this so much. Let's take a look at the passage from The Passing of the Grey Company. To the stone the company came and halted in the dead of night. Then Elrohir gave to Aragorn a silver horn, and he blew upon it. And it seemed to those that stood near that they heard a sound of answering horns, as if it was an echo in deep caves far away. No other sound they heard, and yet they were aware of a great host gathered all about the hill on which they stood, and a chill wind like the breath of ghosts came down from the mountains. But Aragorn dismounted, and standing by the stone he cried in a great voice, "Oath breakers, why have ye come?" And a voice was heard out of the night that answered him as if from far away, "To fulfill our oath and have peace." Then Aragorn said, "The hour is come at last. Now I go to Pelagir upon Anduin, and ye shall come after me. And when all this land is clean of the servants of Sauron, I will hold the oath fulfilled, and ye shall have peace and depart forever. For I am Elisar, Isildur's heir of Gondor."
Man, I love that. I love that. I mean,
Top-notch
definitely would have to
Tolkien.
go back to those episodes where I covered that. I think it was right after your run. I think it was with James Tauber that I did these chapters. And I remember digging into some of the deeper details on the Oathbreakers and the stone and all of this. But one thing that I totally missed, that line, "a chill wind like the breath of ghosts." Is that not one of the most vivid descriptions of a cold mountain wind like that?
You can feel the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So that is exactly what the prophecy of Malbeth was referring to, right? The dead awaken, the hour is come for the Oathbreakers. At the stone of Erech, they shall stand again. I absolutely adore that connection and the fact that, he makes that prediction sometime during Arvedwi's reign, so 1964 to 1974. So, 1,100 years or more before we get to 3019 and the fulfillment of that particular prophecy.
Well, when you're a dead ghost hanging out in the mountains, it doesn't really seem like that long, really.
No,
all things
probably
considered.
not. Any guess from you, based on the Rings of Power television show, who that might be that speaks when he calls the Oathbreakers? Do we want to go on record with this? Because I will. I'm going to go on record with this.
I'll go on. This is, so just for the record, because this is going to be some sort of thing like 6 years from now.
Yeah.
For the record.
Yeah.
For the record, I would like to say that following the end of season 2 of The Rings of Power, I do think Theo is going to be.
That's exactly what I'm saying. They're establishing that relationship between he and Isildur. He's like, "I got you, bro. I got you covered." And then something will happen. And he'll be like, "No, not going to do it.
Sorry."
And he's going to be the king of the dead. I'd originally pegged him as a Nazgul from day one, but I think we're going to see him as the Lord.
When I saw him holding the sword, I'm like, oh, the Nazgul was
number
a child
one.
soldier.
He's a little young for a Witch King. Maybe he's... Yeah. Oh, man. Just a fantastic reading, though. Thank you for that. And I love the prophecy from Malbeth. Great, great stuff.
All right, Alan, do you want to take it away for the next portion of the reading?
I will indeed. In Gondor also, one king only followed Eärnil. It may be that if the crown and the scepter had been united, then the kingship would have been maintained and much evil averted. But Eärnil was a wise man and not arrogant, even if, as to most men in Gondor, the realm in Arthedain seemed a small thing for all the lineage of its lords. He sent messages to Arvedwi, announcing that he received the crown of Gondor according to the laws and the needs of the South Kingdom. But I do not forget the royalty of Arnor, nor deny our kinship, nor wish that the realms of Elendil should be estranged. I will send to your aid when you have need, so far as I am able. It was, however, long before Eärnil felt himself sufficiently secure to do as he promised. King Arafat continued with dwindling strength to hold off the assaults of Angmar, and Arvedwi, when he succeeded, did likewise. But at last, in the autumn of 1973, messages came to Gondor that Arthedain was in great straits, and that the Witch King was preparing a last stroke against it. Then Eärnil sent his son Eärnur north with a fleet as swiftly as he could, and with as great strength as he could spare. Too late. Before Eärnur reached the havens of Lindon, the Witch King had conquered Arthedain, and Arvedwi had perished. But when Eärnur came to the Grey Havens, there was joy and great wonder among both elves and men. So great in draught, and so many were his ships, that they could scarcely find harborage, though both the Harland and the Forland also were filled. And from them descended an army of power, with munition and provision for a war of great kings. Or so it seemed to the people of the north, though this was but a small sending force of the whole might of Gondor. Most of all, the horses were praised, for many of them came from the Vales of Anduin, and with them were riders tall and fair, and proud princes of Rhovanion. Then Círdan summoned all who would come to him, from Lindon or Arnor, and when all was ready, the host crossed the Lune and marched north to challenge the Witch King of Angmar.
Devastating stuff.
Yeah,
I love
it is.
it. So were we overstating the case at the end of the last section when we said that Gondor had to wait 1,200 years to have a proper king? Because they all basically refused to accept Arvedwi's claim? No, not really.
We were not overstating the case. I mean, look, Eärnil was a perfectly fine guy. He was a good king. But let's wait and see what happens. Something that wouldn't have happened, or is likely not to have happened, had Arvedwi become king. That's all we're saying. The writer of whatever account is being included here in the appendix openly speculates, suggesting that if Arnor and Gondor had been united here, the kingship might have stuck around.
After all, Eärnil was very humble and wise. This is kind of in contrast to many in Gondor who saw Arthedain as a small thing, despite the fact that its kings and its descendants are all of Isildur.
Right. And in that wisdom and humility, again, Eärnil, not Eärnur, let's be clear, Eärnil reached out to Arvedwi saying, look, I've accepted the crown of Gondor based on our laws and needs. Paragraph 7, subsection 13. You know, it's just a little detail. I don't know why I just broke out Kermit. It wasn't even intended to be. It was just supposed to be sort of this
dweebish it's canon
little,
now.
Like, I can't take it back now. But yeah, I was trying to just make him a little bit like sort of dweebish, spreadsheet guy, little rules lawyer. So
I love it.
And you got Arvedwi up there, the rules, they're more like guidelines.
Oh my God. All right. So Barbossa and Kermit the Frog walk into a...
Anyway, so Eärnil, look, I accept the crown of Gondor based on the laws and needs, right? I'm here. Mm-hmm. I'm a mighty, mighty warrior, and they've chosen me, so good on them. But hey, you know what? I hear you, right? You guys are royal up there too. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And I do like, though, that he recognizes the royalty of Arnor, right? What does he actually say? He says that very specifically. I do not forget the royalty of Arnor. He doesn't say Arthedain. He's not talking about these successor kingdoms. He seems to see Arthedain as simply Arnor Part 2. And it was, of course, the more legitimate of the 3 successor kingdoms.
Yeah, and not only that, he acknowledges basically their kinship and the desire for their kingdoms to one day be, united together, except I guess just not right now, Yeah,
just not right now, right? Not while I'm going to be king. But yeah, maybe eventually down the road, yeah. But he does, of course, promise to send aid when needed to the best of his ability. But that's the problem. It's his ability, not his willingness, that is in question. Yeah.
And while Arafant and after him Arvedwi keep holding off Angmar, the situation is getting desperate until Third Age 1973, when Arthedain was on the edge of being wiped out, with the Witch King preparing a last stroke against it. Finally, Eärnil sends his son Eärnur, more on him in a little bit, sends it north with a fleet and soldiers. However,
but it was definitely too late. By the time that the fleet reached Lindon, Arthedain was gone and Arvedwi was dead in the ice bay of Forachel. He died in March of 1975. Still, we've got to do something with all these ships and soldiers, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of ships, and we're not talking about the Rings of Power ones. There are so many boats, ships, that they could barely find a place to anchor all of them, even with all three havens filled. We've got Forland, 200 miles to the northwest of the Grey Havens, the Grey Havens themselves. Then you've got Harland, about 150-ish miles southwest of the Grey Havens.
Yeah.
And then when the armies disembarked, it was massive, the positively massive to the people that are basically remaining here in the north, a provision of a war of great kings.
Man, I mean, this is a massive force that's been transported up here. But as a percentage of the armed forces of Gondor, it was tiny. The text says a small sending force. Not only do we have ships and sailors, infantry and munitions, we've got cavalry with their horses. Now, that's interesting because, I gave Rings of Power a lot of trouble for trying to suggest that they shipped a massive cavalry force, but that had more to do with the fact that they sent a much larger cavalry force than they had quantity of ships. Here we've got ships filling 3 harbors, so fine, I'm going to buy it. But not only do we have these cavalry and their riders, the thing to note, though, is that most of them are from the Vales, with riders who were proud princes of Rhovanion. And I feel like this is another thing that Tolkien's doing to connect the Northerners, who would later become the Eotheod, who would then, of course, become the Rohirrim. And it also, though, reminded me of something we talked about recently on our discussion about Númenor. The Númenorians didn't use cavalry, but instead would often use mercenary cavalry when they were having to fight battles in Middle-earth. And the Gondorians seem to carry on in the same way. Yeah, they figured out how to transport cavalry on ships, but note that the cavalry is described as primarily coming from the Vales of Anduin and the riders being princes of Rhovanion.
Once these huge forces had disembarked, Círdan basically took command of a combined force of Lindon and Arnor, crossed the Lune, and headed off to face off against the Witch King.
Yeah. Now, in the part that we didn't read, but talked about a few weeks ago, the Witch King was now kicking his feet up in Fornost, the former capital of Arnor, and then Arthedain, just having a little party, because he's filled it with evil folk.
Yeah, love just filling it up with evil folk. And then, of course, because evil is, in Tolkien's case, often prideful, he didn't wait for them to attack him in a strong defensible position. He went out to crush them, driving them basically back into the river.
Now, here's the thing. That's not an unlikely result. I mean, just the year before, we read, and this was just a few weeks ago, that he, meaning the Witch King, captured Fornost and drove most of the remaining Dunedain over the Lune. Among them were the sons of the king, that would be Arvedwi. But man, once again, this is something that we see constantly with Sauron too. He attacks too early instead of waiting for his forces to build up. And in this case, well.
In this case, we're going to find out what happens after the break.
Now, folks, if you're enjoying the show, I would appreciate it if you would consider supporting the PPP by joining the Fellowship of the Podcast. Now, that's what gives me the time and resources to work on making this show better every season. When you join, you get the best Discord community around that includes live episode recordings. There are about 70 or 80 people listening in right now as we do this talk. You also get Hangouts every month, you get episode postscripts, you get ad-free episodes, free merch, and more.
You can also become part of our Questions After Nightfall episodes or even join us as a guest in the North Wing. So please go to patreon.com/prancingponypod to show your support and join the Fellowship of the Podcast.
Now, you can always help us out by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and a rating on Spotify. And please recommend us to your friends. But Don, as we come back in, the next reading is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Alan. It is I was going to say a doozy, but that doesn't quite feel like what this battle is going to be. It feels more like a chaos. Let's dive in. But the host of the West came down on him out of the hills of Evendim, and there was a great battle on the plain between Nenuyal and the North Downs. The forces of Angmar were already giving way and retreating towards Fornost, when the main body of the horsemen that had passed round the hills came down from the north and scattered them in a great rout. Then the Witch King, with all that he could gather from the wreck, fled northward, seeking his own land of Angmar. Before he could gain the shelter of Carn Dûm, the cavalry of Gondor overtook him, with Eärnor riding at their head. At the same time, a force under Glorfindel the Elf came up out of Rivendell. Then, so utterly was Angmar defeated, that not a man nor an orc of that realm remained west of the mountains. But it is said that when all was lost, suddenly the Witch King himself appeared, black-robed and black-masked upon a black horse. Fear fell upon all who beheld him, but he singled out the captain of Gondor for the fullness of his hatred, and with a terrible cry, he rode straight upon him. J.R.R. would have withstood him, but his horse could not endure that onset, and it swerved and bore him far away before he could master it. Then the Witch King laughed, and none that heard it ever forgot the horror of that cry. But Glorfindel rode up then on his white horse, and in the midst of his laughter, the Witch King turned to flight and passed into the shadows. For night came down on the battlefield, and he was lost, and none saw whither he went. J.R.R. now rode back, but Glorfindel, looking into the gathering dark, said, "Do not pursue him. He will not return to this land. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall, but instead a really pretty blonde lady."
Oh, and a little tiny hobbit.
Yeah.
It would have helped, though, if Glorfindel would have added those details. But let's go back to the beginning of that passage. Círdan shows up. Mama, there goes that man. Or elf, as the case may be. He leads the host of the west as they come flying out of the hills of Evendim, engaging in battle on the plain between Lake Evendim and the North Downs. That would be, of course, then between Annúminas and Fornost.
Angmar was already retreating back with their newly captured stronghold of Fornost, but they were intercepted by those horsemen we were talking about. They had basically gone around the hills of Evendim to the north, then came down onto the plains, routing all of the bad guys.
That's right. Now, the Witch King did what he could, right? He got a few of his forces together and was beginning to retreat towards Angmar. Now, that's a long retreat from Fornost. But Gondor's cavalry, led by none other than the king's son, J.R.R. himself, caught up to him.
And as if that weren't enough, we have yet another force that is joining the battle. Glorfindel is here leading the elves from Rivendell that came up and attacked as well.
I see it now. Glorfindel joins the chat. Glorfindel, who, of course, has killed multiple Balrogs. I mean, this dude, he is something else, let's be clear. But interestingly, I was thinking about this. They must have gotten word in Rivendell a while back, because the distance from Fornost to Carndum is about 25 to 30% less than the distance from Rivendell to Carndum. So they would have had to be, on the way a long time before. They must have gotten some word. Maybe Círdan sent word. Maybe there was a little Osanwe involved there.
Yeah. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Like a message of like, hey, we could probably use some help right now. That'd be great if you don't mind.
Yeah.
And then these forces combined to wipe out Angmar so badly that not a man nor an orc of that realm remained west of the mountains. Ugh.
That's a pretty thorough defeat. I mean, that suggests that every single man and orc of that realm was at the battle and got slaughtered. Or it suggests that the good guys then went around chasing down every last remaining man or orc and killed them.
I think the way he's describing it, for me at least, Tolkien is saying everyone showed up there. Like the women and children back at the home of these northern folk, they're not about to start a revolt. They don't have the manpower.
It also could just be a poetic way of saying
that's true.
This, that they were that badly defeated. Yeah.
Yeah. But the dramatic moment, Alan, is not over. The Witch King has not had his say yet.
No, he's not. He shows up in full goth gear, right? Black robes, black masks, on a black horse, probably listening to the Smiths. I don't know.
Black Sabbath, maybe?
Oh, well, okay. I was thinking something really, really goth, but yeah, that works too. Yeah. Absolutely. Fits completely. He terrifies everyone, of course, but is focusing all of his hatred on one guy in particular, and that's J.R.R. And I have to ask you, why do you think that is? He's got Glorfindel to direct his hatred on. Why is he directing his hatred toward J.R.R.?
Because bullies don't pick on people as strong as them.
I like that. No, you're absolutely right. Glorfindel, I mean, if you notice later, Glorfindel's here, I'm out, right? He's So, yeah, I think it's also a little bit of that sort of inherited hatred of the men of Westerness, right? I mean, Sauron
for sure
hates Elendil more than anybody, but all the way back to his days in Númenor.
He's the worst of the worst. Yeah. It's like, this guy's been bothering me for thousands of years. So the Witch Kings got like, all right, I'm riding straight at this guy full speed. The text says J.R.R. would have stood his ground, but his horse couldn't quite manage it. bolting and running away.
I mean, he is a horse. Even if he's well trained, that's a terrifying thing. But then, as he often did, before being stabbed in the leg by a hobbit, then stabbed in the face by a woman, the Witch King laughed his terrible laugh, literally traumatizing everybody in earshot.
Yeah, the laughter, though, turns very quickly into an, oh, okay, I gotta go, that the minute Glorfindel shows up.
Yeah, he peace outs right out of there. Can we talk about what must have gone through the Witch King's mind more than 1,000 years later, when he's chasing a little hobbit dude that he stabbed with a Morgul blade, and suddenly Glorfindel shows up and chases him into the river, causing him to lose his horse. I mean, he's got to be not that guy again. What is up with that?
Yeah, that guy again.
It's the first time he's seen him in 1,000 years, and he chases him into the river.
Do you think maybe like in the same way that we think, why does Tolkien keep having the eagles show up? The Witch King is like, why is Glorfindel always here? Oh, so he turns tail.
Why is he
and
here?
Runs.
I don't get it.
Why? I don't understand. So obviously he turns tail and he runs as night comes so that no one can even see where he went. Remember, wearing all black, everything has its advantages. Just ask Jay-Z.
Does have its advantages. That's right. Not so much in the daytime.
And we now get, not so much. But we get this great prophecy from Glorfindel as J.R.R. comes back to his now sort of more chilled out horse. And the Elf Lord is saying, hey, don't go after him. He is not coming back here. Stop.
No. And you know what? Thinking of Glorfindel, though, now, I'm thinking of the Witch King riding off, being invisible because he's wearing all black on a black horse at night. And I'm thinking of Glorfindel, who we meet. But before we meet him, we hear these bells on his horse. Like he's got little bells on the harness of his horse. And now I'm picturing the Witch King with bells on the harness of his horse, and we're chasing him because we can hear him getting away.
I love that. I absolutely love that.
That would be funny. But of course, it doesn't happen that way. So like you said, the Elf Lord advises him, he's not coming back here. And that's good news. Okay, what next? Well, far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall. Let's discuss that prophecy, including its notorious lack of clarity. The hand of man, not by the hand of man. But far off yet is his doom. Okay, so it is a ways off.
Yep.
More than a millennium later.
That's the thing about Tolkien that I have to keep reminding myself is that he uses the word human and man interchangeably, but every so often when referring to an individual man, he can sort of say, haha, I got you. You thought I was being sexist, but it's actually just this. Haha. I mean, if it was capitalized, not by the hand of man capitalized, then you would know he was saying specifically the race of man. Yeah.
But the fact that he uses the little m makes me think he is talking about the gender, but he could also be speaking about the race because, of course, he doesn't just fall to Eowyn. He falls to Merry and to Eowyn, and that's the point. Yeah. You've got a male, but he's not a man, and then you've got somebody of the race of man, but who's a woman. It's such an interesting thing. And, of course, it wouldn't be a prophecy if it was like, and not by the hand of anyone except for Meriadoc of the Shire and Eowyn, niece of the king of God. I mean, that's not how prophecies work, right?
Glorfindel, they're so specific right now. You got to chill out, man. You're freaking out the kings. What's going on?
Okay, now going on before we get to the next reading, in the part that we skipped, we do see that J.R.R. is embarrassed at being driven off, and he wants his revenge. That is not a good look, and it's not going to lead to good things.
Yeah, it never is in Tolkien's book, but hey, at least Angmar is finally destroyed. However, it is at the cost of J.R.R. earning the chief hatred of the Witch King, and boy, oh boy, that does not end well.
No, it does not.
You know what does end well, though,
What's
Alan?
that?
You have our final reading of the evening. Would you like to get into it?
Indeed, I do. J.R.R. was a man like his father in valor, but not in wisdom. He was a man of strong body and hot mood, but he would take no wife, for his only pleasure was in fighting, or in the exercise of arms. His prowess was such that none in Gondor could stand against him in those weapon sports in which he delighted, seeming rather a champion than a captain or king, and retaining his vigor and skill to a later age than was usual. When J.R.R. received the crown in 2043, the king of Minas Morgul challenged him to single combat, taunting him that he had not dared to stand before him in battle in the north. For that time, Mardil the steward restrained the wrath of the king. Minas Anor, which had become the chief city of the realm since the days of King Telemnar and the residence of the kings, was now renamed Minas Tirith, as the city ever on guard against the evil of Morgul. Eärnur had held the crown only 7 years when the Lord of Morgul repeated his challenge, taunting the king that to the faint heart of his youth he had now added the weakness of age. Then Mardil could no longer restrain him, and he rode with a small escort of knights to the gate of Minas Morgul. None of that riding were ever heard of again. It was believed in Gondor that the faithless enemy had trapped the king, and that he had died in torment in Minas Morgul. But since there were no witnesses of his death, Mardil the Good Steward ruled Gondor in his name for many years. Now the descendants of the kings had become few. Their numbers had been greatly diminished in the kin strife, whereas, since that time, the kings had become jealous and watchful of those near akin. Often those on whom suspicion fell had fled to Umbar and there joined the rebels, while others had renounced their lineage and taken wives not of Númenorian blood. So it was that no claimant to the crown could be found who was of pure blood, or whose claim all would allow, and all feared the memory of the kin strife, knowing that if any such dissension arose again, then Gondor would perish. Therefore, though the years lengthened, the steward continued to rule Gondor, and the crown of Elendil lay in the lap of King Eärnil in the houses of the dead, where Eärnur had left it.
Somber.
Yeah.
Somber, chilling, all of that. Ugh, it can never be good, can it? All right, so in the paragraph we skipped, we learned that the Witch King indeed did not come back to those lands in the north. He escaped and went to Mordor. This is around Third Age 1980. This is also when we learned that he was the chief of the Ringwraiths.
That's right. Now, 20 years later, after he escaped to Mordor in Third Age 2000, the Ringwraiths leave Mordor via Cirith Ungol and besiege Isildur's old outpost of Minas Ithil, taking it 2 years later and capturing the Palantir there.
We read about this in the Council of Elrond as the Lord of Rivendell is basically filling everyone in on the history of Gondor. He says, "In the wearing of the swift years of Middle-earth, the line of Meneldil, son of Anarion, failed, and the tree withered, and the blood of the Númenorians became mingled with that of lesser men. Then the watch upon the walls of Mordor slept, and dark things crept back into Gorgoroth, and on a time evil things came forth, and they took Minas Ithil and abode in it, and they made it into a place of dread, and it is called Minas Morgul, the Tower of Sorcery. Then Minas Anor was named anew Minas Tirith, the Tower of Guard, and these two cities were ever at war, but Osgiliath, which lay between, was deserted, and in its ruins shadows walked."
Man, I love that passage. Faramir talks about it too, warning Frodo and Sam about that valley. The valley of Minas Morgul passed into evil very long ago, and it was a menace and a dread while the banished enemy dwelt yet far away, and Ithilien was still for the most part in our keeping. As you know, that city was once a strong place, proud and fair, Minas Ithil, the twin sister of our own city. But it was taken by fell men whom the enemy in his first strength had dominated, and who wandered homeless and masterless after his fall. It is said that their lords were men of Númenor, who had fallen into dark wickedness. To them the enemy had given rings of power, and he had devoured them. Living ghosts they were become, terrible and evil. After his going, they took Minas Ithil and dwelt there, and they filled it, and all the valley about, with decay. It seemed empty, and was not so, for a shapeless fear lived within the ruined walls. Oh, man, that's a creepy passage.
He's a ghost story writer, I swear. Tolkien's got that.
That's the thing. He's so good at the sort of the psychological aspects of terror and fear and horror.
Yeah. And after they took it, they held it not expelled while the Third Age lasted. And at the same time, and for good reason, most of the Gondorians living in Ithilien moved away. They weren't interested in being there.
Yeah. Suddenly, the neighbors are not such great neighbors. We got to get out of this tract. Yeah. So coming back to what we did read, we learn about Eärnur, the son of Eärnil. Remember when we said Eärnil was wise and humble?
Yeah, that is not the case for Eärnur. He may have been brave like his father, but he was a man of hot mood, shall we say, only really enjoying himself when he's fighting, to the point where he was a better fighter than any of the other men in Gondor, rather a champion than a captain or a king.
And I have to be really clear about that. I mean, yeah, okay, he's talented. He's really good at fighting. I mean, he sounds like such a gym guy, right? I mean,
yeah.
I know the exercise of arms is weapons, but I'm just sitting here watching him like, doing curls with pieces of armor or something. He's just, look at how buff I am, and I'm so strong. Only pleasure is in fighting. I'm not even gonna get married, right? He's a king. These are not compliments. The fact that you are described as a champion rather than a captain or a king says you are not a leader of men. You are just a fighter. You are one-dimensional. It is just not a good thing to describe a king as rather like something else than a king. I mean, really.
You want to be described as a king. That in and of itself has enough descriptor words
for
sure. Yeah. But keep in mind, J.R.R. becomes king in the year 2043. This is 68 years after the Witch King has already laughed at him.
You think he would have let this go by now?
No, he has not forgotten that moment. He's just that kind of person, I guess. Yeah. But neither had the Witch King. Neither of them went to therapy.
I can't imagine the Witch King going to therapy. That's for sure. No.
Just having some trouble at work. My boss is I feel like I'm his slave or something.
So the moment that J.R.R. gets the crown, 68 years after the Witch King laughed at him, the Witch King challenged him to single combat, calling him a coward for not standing up against his charge back in 1975. And all I can think of is Marty McFly.
Oh, for sure. This has the high school bully waiting until you're in their 30s this is just Biff, I think, from Back to the Future.
It is Biff. You're right.
It's just Biff from Back to the Future.
I got Biff as the Witch King. Michael J. Fox as J.R.R. Oh man. That works.
Meantime, the steward Mardil, who would later be given the epithet Varonwe, the steadfast, was very steadfast and able to talk him out of it this time. And this is around the same time Minas Anor, Tower of the Sun, is renamed Minas Tirith, Tower of the Guard.
That's right. Now, Minas Anor had been the capital since King Torondor moved it. Now, we talked about that last week. Yes, the text says since the days of King Telemnar, but it was Telemnar that died in the plague, and it was only after that, as Osgiliath began falling into ruin, that his nephew Torondor moved the residence of the kings there.
Yeah, but Mardil was not successful in restraining J.R.R. a full 7 years later. This is in the year 2050, when the Witch King sent his challenge again, saying that not only was he a coward, but he was now an old coward.
Okay, maybe I get why he couldn't be held back. I'm beginning to have a little bit of sympathy for J.R.R. here. No, it's been 75 years since he laughed at you. And you're doing what now? So yeah, I totally get this. I mean, I'm feeling what J.R.R. is feeling here. Calling me old, I'm going to come out and I'm going to come fight you now. So he rides off with an escort of knights. Now, I got to say though, for the knights, I'm thinking I'd have called in sick that day, right? I mean, where are we going, boss? Yeah. Oh, we're going to go, we've been given this challenge by the Witch King. I'm going to go fight him in single combat. You're just there to kind of give me a ride. I'm not feeling so great. I think I have a fever. I've tested positive for COVID. I'm staying home today. Yeah, I don't think I want to go to Minas Morgul. No. So they head over there and poof, we never see or hear from them again. They're all gone. And let's talk about this because this is a fun thing to speculate about. What happened to J.R.R.? What happened? So
I know that there is a Lord of the Rings online speculation / non-canonical version of J.R.R. that I believe he's a boss to be fought at some point.
Well, yeah. So the game's been out forever, so it's spoilers, I suppose. But they decided to come up with this idea where he got transformed into a wraith, not as powerful as a Nazgul, of course. In fact, he's subject to the Nazgul. And they end up making him this steward of the Witch King in Angmar. So he ends up, it's really nasty. It goes even further afield than that. I don't want to spoil it completely for people who are playing the later expansions, but the idea is that he is stuck serving the Witch King, and it's miserable and terrible.
I have a question then, Alan, and forgive me if I'm speculating too much. Have the 9 ring wraiths been established within canon at this point? Are there already 9, or are there simply the Nazgul?
Long time ago, the 9 reappear, the 9 reemerge. Yeah, it's all through the Tale of Years. I know.
Yeah, like, is there a world that exists where you take someone like J.R.R. and say, okay, this Nazgul is out, you're in, because, great kings of men, he's still the ruler technically. So
yeah,
maybe,
well, they already have the 9, so I guess you'd have to fire one of them. And I don't know what happens to one of them if you fire them. I assume they just disappear, but
probably some fire.
Now what you're talking about is stuff that we saw in the Shadow of Mordor game, where they end up making Isildur a ring wraith. They make Helm Hammerhand a ring wraith. It's sort of like the Nazgul's sort of like Oprah Winfrey. You get a ring and you get a ring and everybody gets a ring, and everybody's a flipping ring wraith in that game. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen.
And Shelob is a sexy spider.
Don't get me wrong. I love sort of Assassin's Creed Mordor, which is what I call it. It's
that's what it is.
That's really what it is. But yeah, the idea that, it's just silliness. Pure silly.
Yeah.
On second thought, let's not go to Shadow of Mordor. 'Tis a silly place.
Well, whatever Eärnor's fate actually was, Mardil, the good steward, rules in his name in Gondor. Eärnor has not married, has no heir, so his father, Eärnil, also had no other children.
Right. So who do they turn to? Because this is a whole new branch of the line, right? Because the previous line with Andaher and his sons is gone, so they can't go back to that line. Otherwise, they already would have, and Eärnil would never have been king. But Eärnil only has Eärnur, and Eärnur has no children, so this line ends. And once again, you just can't help but think, what if they'd taken Arvedwi's claim? But they couldn't turn to Arvedwi now. He'd been dead for 75 years by this point. So, yeah. And it thus proves Malbeth's point in the prophecy. Had Gondor allowed Arvedwi to take the throne, this all would have been avoided, and the kings of Gondor would continue to rule, and he would have gotten a new name, but we don't know what it was.
It is a tragedy. The line of kings had very few descendants. After all, most of them had been killed during the kin strife.
Yeah,
and then after that, the kings would get suspicious, and their potential alternate heirs would occasionally go to Umbar, start joining the rebels. Maybe
you're sitting here minding your own business, and then your uncle or your second cousin or whoever's the king comes and sends somebody to take you away. So yeah, you end up leaving and going to Umbar and joining the rebels, or you just renounce your heritage altogether and say, don't worry, I don't even want anything to do with the kingship. I'm out. So
this is just Dune, and that's the Harkonnens.
Yeah, kind of.
That's the Harkonnens in the Dune franchise.
Yeah.
Oh, incredible.
And so nobody can claim the throne as a result of all this, right? There's nobody who is of pure enough blood, and certainly nobody whose claim would be sufficient for all, because that's sort of the thing here. Yeah, you can say somebody's king, but if the people don't accept him as king, well, that's what happened with the kin strife, right? They didn't all accept Eldacar as king. That's how Castamir became the usurper. So you can't just have a king who the council says this guy's king if everybody isn't going to get behind him. You really have to have consensus. And there's nobody given that kin strife who's going to be able to step up and be accepted by everybody. And I got to say that last bit, the last part of the reading, right? The very last couple of lines about if any such dissension arose again, Gondor would perish, totally just reminds me of the fragility of the kingship. The Civil War just wasn't that long ago, and nobody wanted to risk that again.
Yeah, no. And I think it's saying something that how Aragorn did it is so great. He goes to Gondor. He earns the respect of the people in Gondor before he even claims the kingship. And then he leaves. He's saying, I've got other places to be, but I'm glad you guys like me. Maybe I'll be back. And so the stewards basically continue to rule Gondor. Sometimes the king pops in for a little bit, but then leaves. And guess what? We're taking a look at all of those stewards next week as we close the episode here.
So it was that no claimant to the pony could be found who was of pure Butterbur blood, or whose claim the common room would allow, and all feared the memory of the bag strife. Don, what does Barlowin have for us tonight?
Sorry, that was very, very clever, Alan. I'm gonna tip of the cap to you on that one.
Thank you, Don. It is proving to be more and more of a challenge every time. Like I'm trying to write these segues. It's getting fun, but it's getting hard in the appendices, that's for sure.
I absolutely love it. Well, obviously we do a lot of what if and speculation here, but I thought we could add a little bit of contextual reference because we've been talking a lot about him this episode, and that is Glorfindel. And the question comes from Kara B, and it's a small question, but I promise I added way more context and got way more quotes.
Good.
Is that the same Glorfindel? She asks.
Aha. Is that the same Glorfindel? What does she mean? Is it the same? Is it the same Glorfindel that we see later in the Third Age?
Yes. So for a bit of setup for all of this, is the Glorfindel that we see rescuing Frodo in the forest from the Nazgul the same one that we see killing the Balrog, saving the people of Gondolin during the siege? Are they the same elf? And, how and why did all of this come about? And I do want to mention just very briefly before we get into it, because in his essay on fairy stories, Tolkien says that after speculating that since fairy stories are made by men and not by fairies, they must deal with what he calls the great escape, the escape from death. He went on to the singular assertion that the human stories of the elves are doubtless full of escape from deathlessness. And I think Glorfindel really encompasses that sort of deathlessness because he is, for all intents and purposes, the only elf we see in the Legendarium say, hey, all right, my time has come. I'm back. Let's do this. I've also got something here from Christopher Tolkien. In The Return of the Shadow, Christopher Tolkien says that sometime after the publication of The Lord of the Rings, his father, quote, gave a great deal of thought to the matter of Glorfindel. This was in the book, and decided that it was a, quote, somewhat random use of a name from the Silmarillion that probably would have been changed had it been noticed sooner.
So then he retcons that it's the same guy. Okay.
Yes, as he does so many times, because we have things like, remember that other elf named Legolas, or that other human named Denethor. There are instances of names being repeated. So Christopher here is potentially saying, oh, well, perhaps it's random, perhaps it's another elf, but if he had changed this, may it also have been the same one. Tolkien wrote that Glorfindel is basically sent back to Middle-earth by the Valar during the Second Age. This is around 1600 of the Second Age. This is when Barad-dûr is complete, when Sauron has forged the One Ring, and while Númenor is basically friendly with the elves. This is under the reign of Tar Monastir, and he is sent as, or at least I think the understanding is, that he is sent as a kind of predecessor to the Astari. There are some versions where he is sent together with the Blue Wizards. At one point, it is considered that Glorfindel might have even been one of those Blue Wizards, though it's fairly immediately.
I was going to say, that sounds like something Tolkien would have said, nope, scratch this idea.
Yeah, one of those ideas you get at the pub next to C.S. Lewis going like, no, I think not. There's too much. But it's that escape from deathlessness that I think really stuck with me. The thing that I love about social media these days is that the algorithms can bring you such perfect timing for things, because I saw this pop up on my For You page on TikTok. This is an interview that J.R.R. Tolkien said that human stories are always about one thing, aren't they? Death, the inevitability of death. And then he pulls out a piece of paper and starts quoting from A Very Easy Death from de Beauvoir. And it's a very beautiful piece. But Glorfindel to me is that sort of escape from deathlessness that the elves are sort of fighting.
So not so much escape from death, like when you say escape from deathlessness, I'm thinking like the Lay of Luthien and Luthien actually becoming human and dying. You're saying more like the escape from death itself. So it's like the escape from death rather than the escape from deathlessness.
The escape from deathlessness, that is sort of the humanizing of the story. So that when, the hobbits or the humans are looking at Glorfindel, they're just sort of seeing this, elf. But then there is also the deathless. They come back, and Glorfindel, you'll remember when in his portion with the fight against the Nazgul, he's glowing. Frodo sees this great elf that has sort of become,
as he is on the other side, I believe.
Yes, exactly.
Now, why is he like that? Well, because he has returned. He's come back. So what you said, he came back around Second Age 1600. Why was he there in the first place? Did we mention, for those who don't know, how he died in the first place? We've talked about him killing Balrogs. That's actually how he died. At the very end, in the middle of the escape from the fall of Gondolin, he was trying to sort of shepherd the survivors through the Cirith Thoraneth, the pass between the mountains. And they were attacked. They were ambushed by orcs and a Balrog. And Glorfindel ends up fighting alone against the Balrog, and they both die, falling into the abyss. That I believe there's something about the duel is sung of by many songs or something like that. And then his body is rescued by Thorondor, and they raise a cairn over it, and that stays there until the world is changed. So he dies in the first age 510. So, he does have to wait a little while to come back to get a new body and get rehoused, but nowhere near as long as, let's say, Feanor and his kin. Because Feanor is still hanging out there and going to stay there until the end of time. Anyway.
I don't think he's coming back.
So he is the same Glorfindel. So it's Glorfindel in the first age, kills the Balrog, dies killing the Balrog, goes to the Halls of Waiting, and then eventually gets sent back to Middle-earth in Second Age, 1600. He ends up in this scene where he ends up scaring off the Witch King, laying out this prophecy. And then in the Third Age, he's there to help make sure that Frodo gets across the river when he's being chased by the Nazgul. Like we said, there's that guy again.
There's that guy. He just keeps showing up.
Great stuff. Well, I love that. And Glorfindel is an awesome note on which to wrap up this episode of the Prancing Pony podcast. Please be sure to come back next week when we take a close look at the line of stewards who ruled Gondor for nearly 1,000 years.
Much like myself, Matt from the Nerd of the Rings, are taking Sean's place until 1,000 years from now, when Sean's ancestors or descendants will come back and form the Prancing Pony podcast anew.
We are the podcast in exile. Yes.
No civil wars here, though, thankfully. For real, though, no civil wars, all friendship. Alan and I do want to thank all of the members of Team PPP with whom we have not had kin strife with. This is editor Jordan Rannells, Barleyman Becca Davis, social media manager Casey Hilsey, event and Patreon community coordinator Katie McKenna, graphic artist Megan Collins, and website guru Phil Dean.
Now, please take a minute to check out the prancingponypodcast.com. That's where you're going to find show notes, outtakes, Prancing Pony ponderings, our online storefront where you can get PPP merch, including all the really, really cool episode artwork. I was actually thinking about one of her pieces when we talked about the horn that Aragorn blew at the Stone of Erech. I believe that's actually in the design for that chapter. Just fantastic stuff. And her work on the appendices this year is off the charts. So definitely go take a look at that.
Love that. You can also visit our library page. The Prancing Pony podcast is, after all, a podcast about books. So if you are interested in a book that we've mentioned, you're going to find a link for it in our library. We do get a small amount of compensation when you make that purchase, and we do thank you for that.
Indeed. And we also want to thank our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier. I'll start with DeMay in Alaska, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Paul in Colorado, Joseph in Michigan, Kathy from North Carolina, Carlos in California, Brian in the UK, Jerry from Washington, Joe in Washington, Erwin from the Netherlands, Ben in Minnesota, Anthony in Texas, Karen in the UK, June in Ireland, Zaksu in Illinois, Sarah in New Jersey, Joshua in Massachusetts, Lucy in Texas, and Keith in Alabama.
There's also Erica in Texas, Carson in Oklahoma, Vivian in California, James in Massachusetts, Ann in Kentucky, Sean in New Jersey, Mason in California, Maureen from Massachusetts, Olivia in London, Robert in Arizona, Nick in Wisconsin, Lewis in South Carolina, Thomas in Germany, Craig in California, Bailey in Texas, Kevin in Massachusetts, Julie in Washington, Bruce in California, and Joe in Maryland. Thank you all very much for the support.
Indeed. Thank you.
Make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony podcast. You can subscribe now through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcasting app.
And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, your arguments for claiming the crown of Gondor to Parliament at theprancingponypodcast.com. Per my last email.
If you would like to have your voice literally heard instead of per my last email, it can be a voice note. You can send us the audio of your per my last email questions at podinbox.com/prancingponypod. Record your claim to the throne and or your questions there, though be sure to still send the email to Bart.
Yeah, please do. Now, even though Bartleman's been a lot more reliable lately and will hopefully be a lot less passive-aggressive than Gondor was, there is still a lot of mail to sort through. We will try to get to you just as soon as we're able. As always, though, this has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
I am Don Marshall, the obscure Lord of the Rings facts, and I am now the owner of this podcast. Cue the kin strife.